Hello and thank you for watching. This is STSC back again with LEGO Transformers G1 Soundwave. G1 Soundwave is probably one of my favorite Transformers designs ever. I've always loved his alternate mode of a cassette player, and his robot mode is kind of the quintessential Transformer design. It's just a man made out of boxes and I love it. Something I'm particularly happy about with this version of Soundwave is that I was able to use dark blue and Orange instead of regular blue and yellow. I just think this color scheme looks a lot nicer. Turning him around, you can see that his cassette player mode is kind of a facade. From behind it is, well, pretty messy. You can see his hands pretty clearly in the back, and his head isn't really all that hidden, but I don't think it's really that big of a deal. I mean, realistically, how often are you looking at the back of the cassette player? I'd like to point out that I only just realized that you could store his weapons here. I didn't actually design it that way, just kind of a happy accident. Taking a closer look, you can see one of my favorite details, a pair of tooth pieces used to represent the triangular buttons on the cassette player. The door is able to open here, but unfortunately there's nowhere to put a cassette. Instead, I just colored the internal skeleton to kind of look like a little laser beak in there. But you can't remove that, and it can't transform. For a size comparison, here we have a minifigure. And here we have Optimus Prime in his truck mode. And obviously this scale doesn't make any sense. That's all there is to say about this mode, so now it's time to transform. And here we have Soundwave in his robot mode. And I have to say I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think I managed to capture all of the most important details. Something I really enjoy is his shoulder pad. On the real design, he has a similarly shaped shoulder pad with a little bit of greebling on the front. And here it's kind of represented by this cutout which reveals his shoulder joint. It was completely unintentional, but I kind of just like how it happened to match the real design. I also included the little red forearm stripes, but unfortunately his hands had to be black because these clips don't come in dark blue yet. The teeth I used to represent his buttons also leave a fair bit of hollow space behind them, so they don't limit the leg articulation too much. From behind, you can see that he has a pretty clean transformation. The only little bit of kibble are these panels here on the back behind his shoulders. Honestly, it was surprisingly challenging to decide what to do for his head. I knew I didn't want to just give him the same head as Optimus Prime, but unfortunately the next go-to would have been using the same clips I used on his hands as his forehead crest. But, of course, those don't come in dark blue. Eventually I just settled for this design. I think it kind of captures the overall shape with the large cheek vents and the ears. I don't think it's perfect, and admittedly when I first came up with it I kind of didn't like it, but I think it's really growing on me. In the past, I've used a chromed piece to represent the barrel of Soundwave's gun, but this time I just decided to use basic light gray. I felt it would mix better with the rest of the color scheme. For size comparison, here we have Soundwave with a minifigure. and with Optimus Prime. For articulation, Soundwave's head can look left and right, as well as kind of wiggle up and down, but it's mostly locked in place. The chunks behind his shoulders can fold back in 2 directions, which can be useful for posing his shoulder cannon, or just for getting it out of the way for shoulder movement. And just to show you from the front, this is what it looks like when you're kind of using those joints to adjust how his shoulder cannon is angled. At the shoulder, he has a universal joint which can swing out and go forward and back. Then at the angle, he has a simple 90-degree bend. At the hips, he has a universal joint, which allows them to swing forward and back, as well as in and out. Then at the knees, there's a ball joint, which allows for a swivel and a 90-degree bend. And his toes can pivot. Soundwave has a decent amount of articulation, which means he can pull off a fair amount of poses, though I do find myself wishing I was able to fit in a bicep swivel, as without one, he can't pull off some of the more iconic Soundwave poses. I mentioned earlier in the video that Soundwave is one of my favorite Transformers designs, and as such, this build is probably one of my favorite Transformers I've made. Ultimately, I'm super happy with what I was able to do here, and I just think he looks great. That's not to say that I think this build is perfect. It definitely has its flaws here and there, but this is as good as I could get it right now, and frankly, I'm really happy with it. So, I'll see you next time.